So we'll be talking today about managing market data, and in particular the aspects of reference data and building a solid reference data management strategy for increasing efficiencies, reducing spend, and all the things that we'll talk about. Before I go through the presentation, just a quick outline of the things that we'll be talking about. We'll do a quick introduction to start with, just to set the scene in terms of what reference data is, make sure that we're talking about the same things, and talk a little bit about the challenges today or the difficulties around reference data management. We'll also talk about, take a typical organization and see the different teams that manage reference data, what they do, what do we really mean by reference data management? It might mean different things to different people. And we'll talk again about the consequences of mismanaging reference data in a confident way or in a solid way, in a proactive way. We'll then move on to some principles of reference data management, which might not sound like rocket science, but we'll see the challenges in actually implementing those as well. We'll then move on to some case studies, see some clients that have successfully implemented solid reference data management strategies, what they've achieved with this, what timelines they've done, and how they've actually got there, and what the impact of this has had on their organizations and their businesses. Finally, some concluding remarks, taking your questions and opening up to just opening statements. So, in terms of reference data, if we just define this for the purposes of our presentation, in here, when we say reference data, we are talking about non-streaming, non-delayed, non-terminal related feeds. So we are talking about data that can be acquired, bought from external providers, saved and stored and reused in the organization. There are many vendors out there, as you know, that provide reference data. But again, just some contextualization and some definition here. This includes static prices, this includes reference data, this includes index definitions, security definitions, and all of this. We are wrapping this into things that are non-streaming, non-delayed, non-terminal related feeds. Now, of course, there are challenges in this. Firstly, it is an expensive data set. For teams that manage market data, for teams that are responsible for the budgets there, reference data itself is a consequential part of that budget. It is expensive. It is provided under complex commercials. So vendors will have their own commercials, of course, when you're acquiring or buying that data. But in some cases, you might have multiple options even within the same vendor to have different commercials. And it's just a very complex and convoluted and very clever way, actually, to deliver that reference data. And generally, clients don't have the tools to correctly manage, proactively manage reference data. If we take an example of an organization, just a typical simplified view here, we can distinguish two types of reference data management. The first one is managing the data itself, right? So when we say we are managing reference data, it might mean to some teams that they have to manage the quality of the data, the availability of the data, the timeliness of the data, distributing that data within the organization, and mapping or creating a certain taxonomy in the organization. But also, reference data can mean managing usage and spend, right? We know there is a cost to reference data. It is a complex cost. So some teams will, when we say we're managing reference data, might mean we're monitoring spend, we're optimizing spend, we're allocating spend inside the organization, and so on. Now, typically, this part here on the left-hand side is managed by the IT teams or the business functions. On the right-hand side here, this is typically managed by market data teams or cross-business functions. This is an example. It might not always be the case, but the functions are, broadly speaking, sitting into different silos. It might mean different things to different people. Now, these two functions should talk, and they do talk, right? So if we're assuming that the IT teams or the business functions manage the actual data, they might come to the market data team and say, how much would this cost me? Do we actually have access to that data? Can you allocate the spend? Well, if they would like to have that. But there is communication going in there. And of course, from the other way around, the market data team can say, do you need that data? This is the cost. This is your usage report. We've got some recommendations for you to help you better use that data. Now, this communication between the two isn't always easy, in the sense that to be able to have an efficient communication, we need the right analytics, we need the right insights, and we need those insights to be provided in a way that's efficient and repeatable. And we'll talk a bit about this as we go through the presentation. So the rest of the talk here will be focusing on this aspect of this, of what we say managing reference data. So we'll be talking more about usage and spend. We do have views on this as well. We have products to managing this. But for the purposes of our call here, we'll just focus on managing the usage and the spend itself. Now, mismanaging this, as you can imagine, as you probably know, if this is not managed properly, the costs will increase. And cost increases can vary. They can be spikes at the end of the month. But more generally, they are slowly creeping up costs. So if you look at what happened in the next 6 months, the last 6 months, the last 12 months, the last 18 years, you might notice that the costs are increasing slowly. Nothing noticeable on a month-to-month basis, but eventually it kind of creeps up and the costs get bloated. Also, there are inefficiencies in the way that these are dealt with, operational efficiencies within the organization. This is related to communication, of course, but also we end up creating things or trying our best to better manage this. So we might create multiple accounts. We might not have enough data to discuss and to hold internal consumers accountable. It just drags things and makes things that much slower and that much inefficient. And of course, accountability, a very important aspect that we're seeing more and more of, transparency, accountability. This is internal as well as external. And when we say internal, it's just providing internal usage reports, audit trails. When we talk about the external aspect, it is talking with vendors and making sure that we provide them with the usage reports, compliance, and of course, commercials. So we talked about the challenges here. On the next slide, we'll talk a little bit more about the practices or best practices for a solid reference data management strategy. We'll start by being proactive about it. In many cases, reference data from a usage and spend point of view is managed as a reactive thing. So invoices are provided at the end of the month. We look at the invoices, we pay those invoices, and this is right about as much as we can do. What we'd like to do here, from a strategy point of view, to better manage reference data, is move ourselves from a reactive position to a more proactive position, being able to track usage, track spend, understand where that spend is going, understand who's consuming that data, what data do we have, and how can we control that, but move it from a reactive situation to a more proactive, dynamic situation. This will drive a lot of efficiencies in the organization because we now have the data that we can extract, use to drive decision making. We also need to be predictable. That looks, of course, at the cost aspect of it, so make sure that whatever changes we do have a predictable outcome. If we sign up to a new product, we know exactly how much this will cost us. If we remove a new product, or if we change certain structures in the data requests themselves, we need to be consistent and we need to have predictable outcomes. We also need to establish accountability inside the organization, but also externally. So we need to know who's using the data. We need to have the facts, the evidence, at any level that we can then reproduce and establish a transparency in the firm. And finally, be efficient in the way that we generate the data extracts. We hear lots of stories about prospects and clients, and our clients taking weeks, sometimes months, to generate data extracts to be used within the business. So this should move from a weekly type of generation to a more real-time, dynamic, on-demand generation. Now, of course, this in itself, this is not rocket science. I mean, these are all the terms that we use for a particular strategy. The problem here is how to implement that. The amount of data that we talk about and the complexity of the models, the size of the organizations, just makes this from a practical point of view very complicated to set up and to implement. This is where technology comes in. Okay? So today we have technology that allows us to implement all of those principles in an organization to better manage reference data at any level, implement those best practices, if you like, that we all like to do, but we find difficult, again, because perhaps we're lacking the tools, we're lacking the processes, and we're doing this. But this needs to be driven, these 4 strategy points need to be driven by solid technology or solid product that helps us actually achieve those in the firms. Talking about clients, so we'll come back to this in a bit. We'll finish the slide and go to the case studies. So what we mentioned here in terms of strategy and in terms of implementing a solid strategy is doable and has been done. So we have many case studies that we can go through. I've just taken 2, and they are very different in sizes. One of them is very large, the other one is relatively small. They have gone through that process of cleaning up, establishing a proper, solid, proactive reference data management strategy. They moved from no visibility on usage, bloating costs, difficulty to allocate spend, to a very clean setup where we know who's consuming what. We can allocate spend internally in a fair way. We have control on our usage and our consumers. We save costs, we reconcile invoices on demand, and we keep internal stakeholders and external vendors accountable. Same thing on the right-hand side, relatively smaller organization. The common theme that we see here is transparency. It's understanding who's consuming what, where's that data going, why do we need it. Difficult to allocate spend on their side as well, and their monthly invoices were just spiking all over the place. It took 1 month to implement that client. They moved from that reactive situation to a proactive visibility. They moved from a after-the-fact reporting with limited data to real-time reporting with facts, evidence at any level. And they now run weekly reports, reconcile invoices in minutes, and also reduce their spend. The point here is, of course, to showcase some clients, but also to say that these strategy elements that we talked about previously are not just applicable to large or small organizations. They apply to organizations of any size. I think really these principles should be part of really the bread and butter of the teams that manage this type of data here. And the outcomes can be quite significant, and it moves us from a place where we're acting to a place where we're now much more proactive and in control. Some concluding remarks here. So the principles are simple. They are driven by technology. It is important to properly manage reference data. It is important to be in control of that usage. It is important to understand where that data is going. It is important to know what we have signed up for, to know who's actually using that data. And again, this is moving from a reactive position to a more proactive aspect. By doing this, we now have the data, the tools, the technology to drive efficiencies within the organization. For teams to take decisions, teams need data, and they need facts, and they need data that is extracted in a way that is repeatable and that is timely. If we go speak to whatever team in the organization and we have generated that report, anything that changes should not take days, should not take weeks. We should go back in minutes, be able to regenerate that report, simulate things, and see where we're going. So efficiencies are very important to enable that communication that we talked about earlier between the different functions and drive efficiencies within the organizations. And of course, transparency, usage transparency, contract agreements, what do we have, usage reports, all linked to the elements of efficiencies to generating the reports as well. As I mentioned earlier, this should be driven by technology. The amount of data and the complexity is way too high to just do this in ad hoc spreadsheets or other solutions. We need to have, or manual solutions, we need to have technology that does this. Of course, as you know, we do provide this products to help organizations better manage reference data. Our product is called XMon. It is built on 3 functions. The first one is real-time monitoring of usage and spend. The second one is helping you optimize usage, optimize that spend. And the third one is building a transparent governance framework within the organization to help you achieve the strategy elements that we talked about in the previous slide. We don't stop here. Just to finish up some concluding remarks, we don't stop here in terms of the different products. We have talked about reference data as a usage and spend part, but we did also touch on the fact that reference data, in terms of managing this, is not just about monitoring spend, optimizing spend, and reconciling invoices and all the things that we do with XMon. If you wanted to look at the data quality aspect of it, availability as well, we have a product for this, and Explore looks at the taxonomy and the search and discovery part of that. Finally, just a quick thank you for being here in terms of the last presentation of the stream today. A quick shout out to our partners and friends at TRG Screen. If you wanted a demo of the product, we are here at the stand over there. So please do come in, and if you have any questions, please go ahead and ask. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Do we have any questions?
Yep.
May I ask you to use the microphone so we have your audio on the...
Sure, thanks very much. Okay, so you had your use cases up there a second ago. You saved 30% in costs for a business that was spending 3 million. You saved 900,000?
Yes, correct.
That's a one-off, is that right?
That process of when we say one-offs It is part of the cleanup. So yes, they will. It is the, let's say, the saving that we've done over the 6 months or 12 months period. So that
Was it actually achieved is the question though.
Does it change?
Was it actually achieved?
It has. The thing is about those savings.
Is it real?
It is real. So the thing about those savings here, just to mention, when we're looking at these, these numbers here are actually, hard dollar amounts on the invoice. So when you look at the charts, when we build those in the analytics, you will look at the invoice, it says, let's say, 6 months ago, and once these changes are implemented, you'll see that dropping down. So it is achieved hard dollar savings on the invoices.
Okay, so that 25% cost reduction on use case 1 is not relative to the annual reference data spend of 3 million?
It is. It would be.
Oh, okay.
It would be.
Is that a data license?
It's a mix of things. It would be data license and others.
Okay. And is this simply to, does this actually, well, there's two parts of it, right? There's the historic stuff that looking at historic data license, I guess duplicate calls and all that sort of stuff. And then there's a second part, which is the truly dynamic optimization of future calls as well.
Correct, correct.
Which part of that do you look at?
So we don't dynamically optimize the data in that sense, like future moving forward, in the sense perhaps of storing the data and EDMing that data or mastering that data. But there are some changes that we can enforce within the system itself to have more efficient requests moving forward. So cleaning up certain unused requests, unused fields, enforcing certain models within the request itself. So there is certainly an element of cleanup that we do with our clients, but then moving forward, this continues. So it continues. Otherwise, if it's left, the cost will just bloat and kind of increase as we go. So there is certainly a level of cleanup, and then the questions become back to the business. Do we need that data field? How much would that cost? Are there alternative options of getting that data? So that communication is now much more efficient and drives further cost optimization. So we bring it down, we leave it down, and potentially even, our clients, we have, in terms of the retention, it is over years. So it's not a one-off exercise. It is a one-off cleanup exercise, perhaps, to start with, but then the whole process of efficiencies and transparency moves on.
The change in the process thereafter.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
So the cost reduction topic is one part of the medal, one side of the medal.
Correct.
The other one is if you are achieving visibility on usage and transparency here, it might be the case that there are some usage which are not entitled. So the other way around, you see, using data without any
access to that data.
Access to that or agreements on this. Do you have a rough figure if this was the case, or if this, or are the 25% the net effect?
So in terms of the cost optimization, well, when we talk about cost optimization here, it is just cleaning up the actual data that we have access to and we know, and we will just optimize that. But to the point of removing, let's say, non-entitled data or all of that, of course, so it's not, cost is one angle of it, but in terms of the transparency, it's knowing who's actually accessing that data, right? And building reports on this in terms of its usage within the organization itself. So it could potentially drive cost reductions, but you can certainly got that data and those reports available to you to be able to understand whether you're accessing data that you're not entitled to, or building those reports that allow you to do that.
So the cost reduction was just on the amount which was originally entitled, and there were contracts on this topic?
Yes, correct.
But do we have an agreement about what's the iceberg below the surface? If there was a number of volume which was actually used but not entitled, because this would be in the end, if I go to my boss and my manager and tell them it's a cost, you have two sides of the medal, yeah? One where you can achieve the cost reduction by achieving efficiency, but on the other way, something becomes obvious, which was not paid for.
That's right, but to be able to achieve this, I assume, is to be able to know that so who's accessing that non-entitled data, right? Is to be able to extract this information. So part of the analytics that are achievable through strategies and products is to be able to see that data and know where it's going. So to be able to your point in terms of drilling down in a bit more detail, you need the data, right? You need the analytics and the usage. So although this is not, the numbers are not covered here, but you certainly have access to those MIs and those reports to know exactly what segments of data are going where, whether they're entitled or not, is something that you can, of course, extract and access.
But you don't have a figure of rough ballpark figure?
It's hard to get. I won't have that number just like that. I mean, these are case studies that we put in for your kind of illustration purposes. But certainly, if you wanted to drill down into more, we're at the stand. So we'd love to have that conversation for sure. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
That is now. Yes. So, question regarding the availability on the ESMA data. What is the experience in the market? Because that's free available from EU. And
sorry.
So the ESMA data is available
Yeah.
for free. How has that impacted the spend on the reference data?
Thank you for that. I mean, it's hard to generalize on this aspect of things. So far, I don't think we have seen, and I've got my analyst Christophe here with us, but I don't think we've seen a direct impact on this at the moment in terms of the clients that we have. There are many decisions that go, as you know, in terms of selecting a data source and where do you get that data from. So maybe it's coming. So far, we haven't seen the aspect of that in terms of the cost.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. But thank you for the question.
Are there any further questions?
Last call. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.